Behold the Empire's ambition. This harbor will secure our dominance. The legions are ready, sir.
By the early 4th century, the Roman Empire was cracking under its own weight. It had grown too large for one man to govern, too stretched along its borders, too shaken by decades of civil war and economic chaos. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, many murdered by their own soldiers. The western provinces grew restless. The frontiers along the Rhine and Danube rivers strained under constant pressure from Germanic tribes pushing inward. Rome, the eternal city, was no longer the practical center of an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. In the year 324, Emperor Constantine made a decision that would reshape the world. He looked east to a small Greek city called Byzantium, sitting on a narrow strip of land where Europe and Asia nearly touch. It controlled the entrance to the Black Sea. It sat along vital trade routes. It was easy to defend, surrounded by water on 3 sides. Constantine declared it his new capital and renamed it after himself, Constantinople. This was not just a change of address. It was the birth of a new center of power, one that would outlast the empire that created it by 1,000 years. Rome was fading. But in the east, something new was rising from the ashes of the old world. Constantine spared no expense building his new capital. He brought in architects, engineers, and artists from across the empire. He stripped statues, columns, and treasures from older cities and shipped them to Constantinople, filling the new capital with the accumulated glory of centuries of Roman and Greek civilization. The city rose around 7 hills, much like Rome itself, with grand avenues, public squares, a massive hippodrome for chariot races, and palaces built to rival anything the ancient world had produced. Constantine dedicated the city in 330, declaring it the New Rome. Its location gave it advantages no other city possessed. Ships moving between the Mediterranean and Black Sea had to pass through its waters. Merchants traveling between Europe and Asia found it impossible to avoid. Wealth poured in from every direction. But Constantine also understood that wealth alone could not protect a capital. He ordered walls built around the city's landward side, an early defense that future emperors would expand into one of the most formidable fortification systems ever constructed. Within decades, Constantinople grew from a modest Greek town into one of the largest, richest cities on earth. It became the administrative heart of the Eastern Roman provinces. And though no one fully understood it yet, this city's walls would soon face tests that would determine the survival of an entire civilization. While Constantinople flourished, the western half of the Roman Empire was dying. Throughout the 5th century, waves of invasions tore through Roman territory in Europe. The Visigoths sacked Rome itself in 410, an event that sent shockwaves through the ancient world. The Vandals carved out kingdoms in North Africa. The Huns, led by the terrifying Attila, raided deep into Roman lands before being turned back. Roman authority in the West crumbled piece by piece, province by province, until there was almost nothing left to defend. In 476, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer removed the last Western Roman. A teenager named Romulus Augustus did not bother replacing him with a republic. The Western Roman Empire, which had stood for over 1,000 years, simply ceased to exist. No grand final battle, no dramatic last stand, just a quiet, almost anticlimactic ending. But in the East, Constantinople did not fall. Its emperors continued ruling, continued minting coins stamped with Roman titles, continued calling themselves Roman citizens, governed by Roman law. They had no intention of seeing themselves as something new. They believed, with complete sincerity, that they were simply Rome continuing in a different location. Historians would later call this surviving state the Byzantine Empire. But the people living in it never stopped calling themselves Romans. The last Romans were now Byzantines. In 527, a new emperor took the Byzantine throne with an ambition that bordered on obsession. Justinian believed it was his sacred duty to reclaim everything Rome had lost in the West. He saw the Byzantine Empire not as a separate Eastern kingdom, but as the rightful heir of the entire Roman world, temporarily reduced but destined to be restored. He found the perfect instrument for his ambition in a brilliant general named Belisarius, whose tactical genius and battlefield discipline made him one of the greatest commanders in Roman history. Justinian sent him first to North Africa, where Belisarius crushed the Vandal kingdom with stunning speed in 533 and 534, recovering territory Rome had lost generations earlier. Then Justinian turned
Great
his
Emperor,
attention
we
to
bring
Italy
tidings from the
itself,
province.
sending Belisarius
Approach
to fight
and
the
be heard.
Ostrogoths, who had ruled
The
them since
empire
the West
stands
could
united,
collapse.
my lord.
The campaign dragged on for years, brutal and exhausting, devastating the Italian countryside, even as Byzantine forces slowly gained ground. Rome itself changed hands multiple times during the fighting. Eventually, after decades of grinding warfare, Justinian's armies controlled Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. For a brief, glorious moment, the Mediterranean was nearly a Roman lake again, just as it had been centuries before. But this triumph drained the treasury and exhausted the army. Victory would come at an enormous cost. While his armies fought across 3 continents, Justinian also wanted to leave a mark that would outlast every battle he ever won. In 532, riots had destroyed much of central Constantinople, including the old cathedral church. Justinian saw an opportunity in the disaster. He commissioned 2 brilliant architects, Anthemius and Isidore, to build something the world had never seen before. The result was the Hagia Sophia, completed in just under 6 years, a building so revolutionary in its engineering that visitors still struggle to understand how it was built without modern tools. Its massive central dome seemed to float impossibly above the building, supported by an intricate system of arches and half-domes that distributed weight in ways no one had successfully attempted before. Light poured through 40 windows around its base, creating an effect that made the dome appear to hover, weightless.
The legions are
defying
ready.
gravity
We
itself.
march east.
When Justinian
Yes, sire.
first entered
The fleet will
finished
secure the sea
building,
lanes.
he reportedly
Good. We
exclaimed
must restore
that he had
Rome's glory.
surpassed Solomon,
By your command, my
referring
lord.
to the legendary temple of the biblical king. The Hagia Sophia became more than a church. It became a symbol of Byzantine identity itself, proof that this empire could create beauty and brilliance to match anything the ancient world had produced. For centuries, it remained the largest cathedral on earth. But even as its dome rose toward heaven, a silent enemy was already approaching the city below. In 541, ships arriving in Constantinople's harbor carried something far deadlier than any invading army. A devastating plague, likely an early outbreak of bubonic plague, swept into the city through trade routes connecting it to Egypt and the wider world. What followed was catastrophic beyond anything the empire had experienced. The disease spread with terrifying speed through Constantinople's crowded streets. Contemporary accounts describe bodies piling up faster than they could be buried, with thousands dying daily at the outbreak's peak. Justinian himself contracted the disease and nearly died, though he eventually recovered. The plague did not stop at the city walls. It spread throughout the empire and beyond, reaching as far as Britain and Persia, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean world over the following 2 centuries through repeated waves. The economic damage was staggering. Farms lost workers, armies lost soldiers. Tax revenue collapsed precisely when Justinian needed money most to fund his ongoing wars in Italy and North Africa. Some historians believe the plague permanently weakened the Byzantine Empire's ability to hold the territories Belisarius had fought so hard to reclaim. The dream of restoring the full Roman Empire was slipping away, not through battlefield defeat, but through an invisible enemy no army could fight. And beyond the empire's eastern borders, other dangerous forces were beginning to gather. For centuries, 2 great powers had contested the lands between the Mediterranean and Persia, Byzantium and the Sasanian Persian Empire. Their rivalry was ancient, bitter, and exhausting, flaring repeatedly into open warfare over territory, trade routes, and religious influence. In the early 7th century, this conflict reached its most dangerous peak. The Persian king Khosrow II launched a massive invasion that captured Byzantine territories across the Middle East with alarming speed. Syria fell. Palestine fell. In 614, Persian forces captured Jerusalem itself, a devastating blow that shocked the Christian world, and they carried away what was believed to be the true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom. Egypt fell soon after, cutting off crucial grain supplies that fed Constantinople's population. By 626, Persian forces had advanced to the very walls of Constantinople itself, while a Slavic and Avar army attacked simultaneously from the north. The empire seemed on the brink of total collapse. But Emperor Heraclius refused to accept defeat. He personally led a daring counteroffensive deep into Persian territory, bypassing the weakened frontier and striking directly at the heart of the Sasanian Empire. His gamble succeeded brilliantly. By 628, Persia was forced to surrender, returning all captured territory and the sacred relic. Byzantium had won its most dangerous war yet. But neither empire understood that both had just exhausted themselves before an entirely new force. While Byzantium and Persia bled each other dry through decades of brutal warfare, something extraordinary was happening on the Arabian Peninsula, a region neither empire had ever considered a serious threat. A merchant named Muhammad began preaching a new faith, and within a generation of his death in 632, his followers had united the previously fragmented Arab tribes into a force of astonishing military and spiritual power. The armies of Islam exploded outward from Arabia with shocking speed. Both Byzantium and Persia, exhausted from their decades-long war, found themselves utterly unprepared for this new threat. Persian forces collapsed entirely within years, and the once mighty Sasanian Empire simply ceased to exist. Byzantium fared only slightly better. Syria fell to Arab armies in 636. Jerusalem, recently recovered from Persia at such enormous cost, fell again in 637. Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, was lost by 642. North Africa followed over the following decades. The territorial losses were staggering, reducing the once vast Byzantine Empire to little more than Anatolia, parts of the Balkans, and scattered Mediterranean holdings. Historians still marvel at how quickly the political map of the ancient world was redrawn. What had taken Rome centuries to build, Islamic armies dismantled in mere decades. And as Arab power grew stronger with each passing year, their ambitions inevitably turned toward the ultimate prize. Constantinople itself became the target. The Arab caliphates launched their first major attempt to capture Constantinople in 674, beginning a siege that would stretch on intermittently for years. The city's defenders watched massive fleets approach across the Sea of Marmara, carrying soldiers determined to claim the greatest prize in the Mediterranean world. Constantinople's famous Theodosian walls, built centuries earlier and continuously strengthened, presented a formidable obstacle that no army had ever successfully breached. Triple lines of fortification, towers spaced at deadly intervals, and a deep moat made direct assault extraordinarily costly. Yet the Arab forces possessed something the city had never faced before: relentless persistence, backed by the resources of a rapidly expanding empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. A second, even more determined siege came in 717 and 718, when Arab forces surrounded the city by both land and sea, settling in for what they hoped would be a final, decisive campaign. The defenders faced starvation, disease, and the psychological terror of facing an enemy that had already conquered two-thirds of the known world. Constantinople's walls held firm against direct assault, just as they always had. But walls alone could not stop a determined naval blockade indefinitely, and the Arab fleet controlled the surrounding waters with overwhelming numbers. The Byzantines needed something beyond ordinary weapons and ordinary courage. They needed a miracle, or something close enough to pass for one. A secret weapon would save the empire. What the Byzantines unleashed against the Arab fleet became one of history's most enduring military mysteries. Greek fire was a weapon so devastating and so closely guarded that its exact formula remains unknown to this day, lost to history despite centuries of speculation by historians, chemists, and military experts. Byzantine engineers had developed a flammable liquid that could be projected from specialized tubes mounted on their ships, creating streams of fire that, remarkably, continued burning even on the surface of water. Enemy sailors watched in horror as flames spread across the sea itself, consuming wooden ships with terrifying speed while seemingly defying the natural laws that should have extinguished them. The psychological impact proved nearly as devastating as the physical destruction. Arab fleets that had confidently sailed toward Constantinople found themselves engulfed in flames they could not understand, let alone fight against. During the siege of 717 and 718, Greek fire devastated the Arab navy repeatedly, destroying ships and crews, while Byzantine losses remained comparatively minimal. Combined with a harsh winter that brought disease and starvation to the besieging army, and the psychological weight of facing an apparently supernatural weapon, the Arab forces finally abandoned their siege in 718, retreating in humiliation after nearly losing their entire expedition. Constantinople had survived its greatest test yet. The empire had endured, battered but unbroken. The city that could not fall had proven its name once again, for now. Following the desperate struggles of the 7th and 8th centuries, Byzantium entered a remarkable period of recovery and renewed strength, beginning in the late 9th century. Historians call this era the Macedonian Renaissance, named after the dynasty that ruled during this golden age of cultural and military revival. Emperors of this period reorganized the empire's military and administrative systems with renewed efficiency, creating a more sustainable structure for governing the territories that remained. Byzantine scholars began systematically preserving and copying ancient Greek and Roman texts, ensuring that classical knowledge survived even as much of Western Europe experienced what historians call the Dark Ages, a period of reduced literacy and cultural production. Constantinople once again became a magnet for trade, scholarship, and diplomacy, its markets filled with silk, spices, and manuscripts flowing between Europe and Asia. Byzantine missionaries spread Orthodox Christianity northward into Slavic territories, fundamentally shaping the religious and cultural identity of regions that would eventually become Russia, Bulgaria, and Serbia. Military campaigns gradually recovered territory lost during the darkest years, pushing back against various enemies along multiple frontiers simultaneously. Byzantine art flourished, producing intricate mosaics and illuminated manuscripts of extraordinary beauty that influenced artistic traditions across the medieval world. The empire that had nearly collapsed centuries earlier was demonstrating remarkable resilience, proving its capacity for renewal again and again. But a new and dangerous enemy waited in the west, growing stronger by the year. Among all the emperors who ruled during this period of renewal, one stands apart for his almost unmatched military record. Basil II came to the throne as a young man, facing serious internal rebellions that nearly cost him his crown before he had truly begun ruling. He survived these early crises through ruthless determination and careful political maneuvering, eliminating rivals and consolidating power with cold efficiency. Once secure, Basil turned his formidable energy toward the empire's long-standing rival in the Balkans, the Bulgarian Empire, which had challenged Byzantine authority in the region for generations. The conflict between Byzantium and Bulgaria stretched across decades, marked by brutal campaigns and shifting fortunes on both sides. Basil pursued this war with relentless, almost obsessive focus, personally leading campaigns year after year rather than delegating to subordinate generals. His eventual victory in 1018 was total and complete, ending Bulgarian independence entirely and earning him the nickname Bulgaroktonos, meaning Bulgar Slayer, a title that reflected both his military success and his reputation for ruthlessness. Under Basil's reign, the Byzantine Empire reached its greatest territorial extent since the days before the Arab conquests, controlling the Balkans, much of Anatolia, and portions of Italy and the Caucasus. He died in 1025, having never lost a major war, an extraordinary record matched by almost no other ruler in history. But his death would change everything, leaving questions about succession that the empire was unprepared to answer. Decades after Basil's death, the Byzantine Empire faced new pressures from Turkish invasions in Anatolia and growing instability that weakened imperial authority. In 1095, Emperor Alexios I made a fateful decision, appealing to the Pope and Western Christendom for military assistance against the Turkish threat. What he received exceeded anything he had anticipated. Pope Urban II's call to arms ignited a religious fervor across Western Europe that produced the First Crusade, an enormous military expedition of knights and soldiers determined to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Thousands of crusaders began arriving at Constantinople, creating immediate complications for the Byzantine emperor, who had hoped for limited mercenary support, not a massive independent army with its own ambitions and leadership. Alexios negotiated carefully with the Crusader leaders, extracting oaths of loyalty and promises to return any reclaimed Byzantine territory to imperial control. For a time, cooperation proved genuinely beneficial. Crusader forces helped Byzantine armies recapture key cities in Anatolia that had been lost to Turkish control. The relationship remained complicated by cultural misunderstandings, religious differences between Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and competing strategic interests, but the alliance held together through the difficult campaign. Jerusalem eventually fell to Crusader forces in 1099, achieving the expedition's primary goal. Byzantium had gained a powerful, if unpredictable, set of allies from the West. But this fragile friendship would soon curdle into something far more destructive than anyone imagined. Over the following century, relations between Byzantium and the various Crusader states grew increasingly strained, poisoned by accumulated grievances, broken promises, and deepening religious and cultural mistrust between Eastern and Western Christians. When the Fourth Crusade launched in 1202, its leaders intended to attack Egypt, the center of Muslim power in the region. But financial difficulties, political manipulation, and a complicated succession dispute within the Byzantine imperial family redirected the entire expedition toward Constantinople itself. Crusader leaders, heavily in debt to Venetian financiers who had provided their ships, agreed to intervene in Byzantine politics in exchange for promised payment and support. What followed shocked the medieval world. After a series of escalating conflicts and failed negotiations, Crusader forces launched a full assault on Constantinople in April 1204. The city's famous walls, which had repelled Persian, Arab, and countless other attackers across 7 centuries, finally fell, breached not by a foreign empire, but by fellow Christians who had once been allies. The sack that followed was catastrophic. Crusader soldiers looted churches, palaces, and homes with savage thoroughness, destroying or stealing treasures, manuscripts, and religious relics accumulated over nearly 9 centuries. Countless irreplaceable works of art and literature were destroyed forever. The Byzantine Empire was carved into competing Crusader states, with a Latin Empire established in Constantinople itself. The unimaginable had happened. The empire was shattered, its capital ruled by foreign conquerors for the first time in its history. For nearly 6 decades, Byzantine successor states in exile struggled to maintain Byzantine identity and culture, while Western Crusaders controlled Constantinople itself. The most successful of these, based in the city of Nicaea, gradually rebuilt military and political strength under a series of determined rulers. In 1261, Byzantine forces under Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos finally recaptured Constantinople, ending nearly 60 years of foreign occupation and restoring the Byzantine Empire to its ancient capital. The celebration throughout the Byzantine world was genuine and profound, a moment of restored pride after decades of humiliation and exile. Michael entered the city in triumph, re-establishing imperial institutions and beginning the difficult work of rebuilding what the Crusaders had damaged or destroyed. But the empire that emerged from this restoration was a shadow of its former greatness. The Fourth Crusade had inflicted wounds from which Byzantium would both never fully recover. Territory remained fragmented, controlled by various Crusader successor states, Italian merchant republics, and ambitious Balkan kingdoms that had carved away pieces during the empire's weakness. The treasury was depleted, population had declined. Trade networks that had once made Constantinople fabulously wealthy now flowed largely through Venetian and Genoese merchants who had established dominant commercial positions throughout former Byzantine territory. Constantinople had returned to Byzantine hands, a triumph worth celebrating. But the empire was no longer the same power that had once commanded fear and respect across 3 continents. While Byzantium struggled to rebuild from the devastation of the Fourth Crusade, a new and far more dangerous threat was steadily growing in Anatolia. Ottoman Turkish forces, beginning as a small frontier principality, expanded relentlessly throughout the 14th century, absorbing Byzantine territory and other competing states with methodical determination. Byzantine emperors, lacking the military and financial resources of earlier centuries, found themselves increasingly unable to resist Ottoman expansion through conventional warfare. Some Byzantine rulers resorted to diplomatic marriages, tribute payments, and uneasy alliances, desperately attempting to delay the inevitable through politics rather than confront Ottoman strength directly on the battlefield. The Ottomans steadily conquered Byzantine territories throughout the Balkans and Anatolia, reducing the once mighty empire to little more than Constantinople itself and a few scattered territories. By the early 15th century, the Byzantine Empire existed as something close to an Ottoman vassal state in everything but name, surviving largely because successive Ottoman sultans had other priorities or internal challenges that delayed their final conquest of the ancient capital. Byzantine emperors traveled desperately throughout Western Europe, begging for military assistance from kingdoms that offered sympathy but little practical help. Religious differences between Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, old grievances from the Fourth Crusade, and simple self-interest meant that Western powers showed little genuine urgency in saving a fading empire many considered already doomed. Constantinople, once the heart of an empire spanning 3 continents, now stood essentially alone against a rising power determined to claim it. In 1449, Constantine the Palaiologos became the last Byzantine emperor, inheriting a capital city surrounded by Ottoman territory and facing what increasingly appeared to be an inevitable final confrontation. He was a capable and dedicated ruler who understood clearly the desperate situation he faced, yet he refused to abandon his city or surrender without resistance. Constantine sent urgent appeals throughout Western Europe, requesting military assistance from kingdoms and the papacy, hoping that shared Christian faith might overcome centuries of accumulated religious and political division. Limited help arrived, including some soldiers and supplies from Genoa and other Italian states, but nothing approaching the massive coalition that would have been necessary to seriously challenge growing Ottoman military power. Meanwhile, the young and ambitious Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II had made the capture of Constantinople his primary obsession, viewing the conquest of this ancient Christian capital as both strategically essential and personally significant to his legacy as ruler. Mehmed assembled an enormous army and commissioned massive cannons specifically designed to breach Constantinople's legendary walls, fortifications that had successfully repelled every previous attacker for over 1,000 years. Constantine prepared his city's defenses as thoroughly as limited resources allowed, knowing that his forces were vastly outnumbered by the approaching Ottoman army. Both rulers understood that history's verdict on this confrontation would be permanent and decisive. The final siege of Constantinople was beginning, and everyone involved sensed that an entire era was approaching its end. The siege began in early April 1453, as Ottoman forces surrounded Constantinople by land and sea, vastly outnumbering the city's exhausted defenders. Sultan Mehmed's massive cannons, including one enormous weapon requiring 60 oxen to transport, bombarded the ancient Theodosian walls relentlessly, gradually creating breaches that defenders worked desperately to repair each night. Constantine the Third moved continuously among his soldiers, providing leadership and encouragement despite increasingly hopeless circumstances, refusing offers of safe passage that would have allowed him to escape while abandoning his people. The defenders, numbering only a few thousand against an Ottoman army of tens of thousands, fought with extraordinary courage and determination, repelling repeated assaults through sheer desperate resolve. Mehmed displayed remarkable strategic creativity, ordering his ships dragged overland around a defensive chain blocking Constantinople's harbor, allowing Ottoman naval forces to attack from previously protected waters. After weeks of relentless bombardment and failed assaults, Mehmed launched his final, overwhelming attack on May 29, 1453. Ottoman forces eventually breached the walls through a combination of sustained cannon fire and discovering an unlocked gate left open during the chaos of battle. Constantine V died fighting alongside his soldiers in the breach, his body never definitively identified afterward, becoming a legendary figure in Greek folklore and history. Constantinople, the city that had stood as a barrier between East and West for over 1,000 years, finally fell. The empire was gone, ending a continuous tradition stretching back to ancient Rome itself. But its memory and influence would never be forgotten. In the aftermath of Constantinople's fall, thousands of Byzantine refugees fled westward, carrying with them centuries of accumulated knowledge, manuscripts, and cultural traditions that would profoundly influence the world they entered. Byzantine scholars settled throughout Italy and Western Europe, bringing with them ancient Greek texts and classical knowledge that had been carefully preserved and studied throughout the empire's long history, while much of Western Europe had lost access to this same intellectual heritage. These refugee scholars taught Greek language and classical philosophy to eager European students, contributing significantly to the intellectual movement historians call the Renaissance, which was already beginning to transform European thought, art, and science. Byzantine artistic traditions, religious practices, and legal concepts continued influencing the Orthodox Christian world throughout Eastern Europe, Russia, and the Balkans long after Constantinople itself fell under Ottoman control. The Russian Orthodox Church explicitly viewed itself as inheriting Byzantine religious and cultural authority, with Moscow eventually adopting the title of the Third Rome, claiming continuity with the fallen empire's legacy and historical significance. Byzantine legal traditions, particularly the comprehensive legal code originally compiled under Justinian centuries earlier, continued influencing legal systems throughout Europe for generations afterward. The empire itself had disappeared from the political map entirely, its territory absorbed into the expanding Ottoman state. Yet Byzantine civilization, in countless subtle and significant ways, continued shaping the modern world that emerged from its ashes. Its greatest impact, in many respects, was only beginning to unfold across the centuries that followed. Looking back across more than 1,000 years of Byzantine history, the empire's true legacy extends far beyond the political boundaries it once controlled or the battles its armies fought and sometimes lost. Byzantium preserved an enormous wealth of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, including philosophy, science, literature, and historical records that might otherwise have been permanently lost to history during Western Europe's turbulent medieval centuries. This preserved knowledge eventually flowed back into Western Europe, that contributing significantly to the intellectual transformation of the Renaissance and the subsequent development of modern Western thought and scientific inquiry. Orthodox Christianity, shaped fundamentally by Byzantine theology, religious practice, and ecclesiastical traditions, continues flourishing today throughout Eastern Europe, Russia, Greece, and other regions, representing one of Christianity's major branches with hundreds of millions of adherents worldwide. Byzantine art and architecture, particularly its distinctive mosaic traditions and innovative approaches to religious building design, exemplified by the Hagia Sophia, influenced artistic and architectural traditions across multiple continents for centuries afterward. Byzantine diplomatic practices and administrative innovations influenced governmental and diplomatic traditions throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The walls fell in 1453, ending a 1,000-year political tradition stretching back to ancient Rome itself. The emperors vanished from history. The imperial banners were lowered permanently after that final devastating siege. But for an entire millennium, Byzantium stood as a crucial bridge between the ancient and modern worlds, preserving civilization's accumulated light through humanity's darkest centuries, and ultimately passing that irreplaceable flame forward into the future that followed.